Welcome, my dear literature enthusiasts, seekers of stories, and lovers of layered meaning. It's such a joy to have you here with me today, gathered not just as viewers of cinema but as readers of life's great texts. Texts written in images, in dialogue, in silences, and in choices. Before we set out on this journey together, let me gently remind you in the most heartfelt way. If you find joy in this kind of exploration, if you find nourishment in treating movies as more than spectacle, but as gateways into thought and reflection, I would love for you to like and subscribe. Not as an obligation, but as a continuation of this shared pursuit, where we can build a small community of people who see film as an art form akin to poetry, layered, unruly, and beautiful. And a note, just to be clear, what we're about to do here isn't a standard review. This isn't about whether a movie is good or bad, or how it stacks up against others in box office numbers or Rotten Tomatoes scores. Instead, what you and I are embarking on is something more intellectual, more theoretical, and I dare say more intimate. It is an exploration meant primarily for an audience with a literature background, for those who delight in unearthing symbols, dissecting themes, and listening for the echo of myth beneath modern narratives. This, in essence, is not about the surface shine, but about the deep waters running beneath it. The film I'd like us to wander into together today is X-Men, Days of Future Past, 2014. I still remember the first time I saw it. Not because of the grand spectacle, though there was plenty of that, but because of how it touched something personal within me, how it wove together questions of destiny and choice in a way that made me feel both small and profoundly significant all at once. I recall sitting there in the dark, surrounded by strangers, yet feeling as though the story was speaking directly to me, asking me questions I'd been quietly wrestling with for years. Is the future fixed, or can we change it? Do our past mistakes define us forever? Or is there redemption in the act of choosing again? There's a kind of electricity that courses through films that dare to balance two temporal planes, stories of the past and stories of the future. Here, that duality is both literal and metaphorical. On the one hand, the film shows us a desperate, dystopian future where survival is nearly impossible. On the other, it plunges us into the political and emotional turmoil of the past, where the seeds of that bleak future were planted. And the heart of it lies in the tension between those two times. Can what is broken in one be healed in the other? I can't help but feel that this reflects how so many of us live our lives, caught between who we once were and who we might still become. The plot itself is a blend of urgency and intimacy. At its core, it follows a plan as daring as it is dangerous. To send a mind across time, to reach into the body of a younger self, and alter the course of history before it spirals into oblivion. It's an idea that's both thrilling and terrifying. The protagonist who carries this burden finds himself in a world he barely recognizes anymore. Not only because the politics and the wars are different, but because the people he once knew are fractured, wounded, and scattered. What struck me most watching it unfold was not just the chase sequences or the battles, but the quiet weight of the conversations between characters. Moments where pain, guilt, hope, and fear collided in ways that felt achingly human. There's a moment early on when the story teases us with its central gamble, that the horrors of the present can only be undone by healing the wounds of the past. And yet, the past is no gentle place. It is filled with betrayal, broken trust, anger, and unresolved grief. To fix the future, the characters must navigate not just the external threats of enemies and politics, but the internal struggles of forgiveness, faith, and reconciliation. And this, I think, is what makes the film linger long after the credits roll. It asks whether salvation is ever truly possible when those who hold the power to change things are the same ones who've been most deeply scarred. Of course, there are twists, moments where alliances falter, where the line between hero and villain blurs, where the very idea of good and evil seems to waver in the heat of desperation. These are not cheap surprises, but carefully planted revelations that force us to ask uncomfortable questions. When someone we trust makes a decision that seems unforgivable, are they lost to us forever, or are they simply lost in that moment? When someone who has committed terrible acts still holds the potential to save us, can we risk extending them grace? I remember sitting back during one of the pivotal sequences, my heart pounding not from the explosions or the spectacle, but from the raw, quiet intensity of a single decision. Whether or not to pull a trigger, whether or not to choose violence or to choose restraint. It struck me then, as it still does now, that the film's most powerful moments are not the ones filled with fire and destruction, but the ones filled with hesitation. The pause before the act. The silence before the storm. These are the moments that felt almost Shakespearean in their weight, as though the whole fate of the world rested not on armies or machines, but on the trembling hand of one person, caught between vengeance and mercy. And the film teases us constantly with the fragility of possibility. Each step toward redemption seems threatened by the inevitability of downfall. Each success feels precarious, ready to collapse under the weight of one betrayal or one misstep. It's like watching someone try to carry water in their hands. You want desperately for them to succeed, but you can see how easily it could all slip away. That tension is what makes the story so absorbing. The sense that nothing is guaranteed, that hope itself is a fragile flame in the face of overwhelming darkness. What resonated with me most on a personal level was how the story doesn't shy away from the complexity of forgiveness. There's a character who has lost faith, who feels betrayed and broken, and who lashes out in anger that seems irredeemable. Yet, within that same person, there exists the potential for incredible good. This duality, this paradox of human nature, struck me deeply. Haven't we all felt that contradiction within ourselves? The part of us that wants to build, and the part that wants to destroy. The film doesn't solve this paradox neatly. It lets it linger, unresolved, forcing us to sit with the uncomfortable truth that redemption is never simple, never guaranteed, but always worth fighting for. Looking back, I realize why this story continues to stay with me. It's not because of the spectacle, though that is undeniably thrilling. It's because it dares to weave together themes of destiny, choice, forgiveness, and the weight of memory in ways that feel not only cinematic but literary. It speaks in metaphors as much as in dialogue. It shows us that the greatest battles are not the ones waged with weapons, but the ones waged within the human heart. And as a lover of stories, of myths, of epics both ancient and modern, I find something deeply satisfying in watching a film that wears its action like armor, but carries within it the fragile, pulsing heart of a tragedy, and perhaps, just perhaps, a redemption. And so, as we step further into this analysis, I invite you to keep your mind open not just to the thrills of the plot, but to the quiet questions it poses. Because what this film offers is not simply entertainment, but reflection on who we are, who we've been, and who we might still become if we dare to choose differently. It is, in its own way, a meditation dressed in the robes of a blockbuster. And that, to me, is what makes it not just memorable, but worth revisiting again and again. The opening moments descend like a heavy silence upon the viewer, pressing in with a sense of inevitability. The world has changed, fractured into shadows of what it once was, and the screen paints it not as a hypothetical nightmare, but as a reality already in place. The skies are darkened, the cities crumbled, and the people, what remains of them, move like ghosts, hunted by merciless machines that seem to embody the cold precision of inevitability itself. There is no safety, no reprieve, only the constant awareness of being watched, pursued, eradicated. The machines, known as sentinels, glide across the screen like predators, adaptive and relentless, capable of extinguishing any spark of resistance that dares to flicker against them. But within this ruin, there is still defiance, a flame that refuses to be smothered. A group of survivors, ragged but unbowed, gathers in secrecy, in hidden spaces beneath the wreckage of the world. Their names echo with the weight of myth. Warriors who have fought before, who have known victories and devastating losses, who now carry not only their own lives but the last fragile hope of humanity on their shoulders. These are not merely characters in a comic book tale, they are archetypes of endurance, the embodiment of the question. What does it mean to fight when defeat seems not just likely but guaranteed? It is in one of these hidden sanctuaries that the plan is revealed, whispered not with bravado but with the hushed urgency of desperation. They cannot fight the sentinels here, not in this time. They cannot win against a future that has already taken root. But perhaps they can unmake it. Perhaps by reaching back into the threads of history, they can weave a new pattern, one in which the seeds of destruction are never sown. It is not an easy plan. It is not even a certain one. It is, in truth, less a plan than a prayer. But it is all they have. Among them stands the one chosen for the journey, not through space but through time. His gift is not foresight but survival, the ability to endure, to heal, to absorb pain and continue forward. It is for this reason that he must bear the burden. His consciousness will be sent back, thrust into the body of his younger self, forced to walk the line between two lives. The man he once was and the man he must become. It is a dangerous path, filled with the risk of losing himself entirely. Yet he accepts it, not out of arrogance but out of necessity. There is no one else who can. The moment the journey begins, the film shifts, tearing us from the bleak ruin of the future into the raw, electric chaos of the past. Gone are the scorched skies and lifeless streets. In their place comes a world still pulsing with possibility. The streets hum with the noise of an era defined by political upheaval and cultural transformation. It is the early 1970s, a time of protest and paranoia, of war abroad and disillusionment at home. The contrast is jarring and deliberately so. The past is not innocent, but compared to the desolation of the future, it feels alive, imperfect, and therefore redeemable. Here, the protagonist wakes, disoriented but determined, inhabiting the body of his younger self. There is a disquieting strangeness in the way he carries himself, memories of two timelines colliding within a single frame of existence. He knows what must be done, though the path forward is murky, obscured by the complexities of people and choices that refuse to be simplified. The first task is clear. He must find allies. Not just any allies, but the ones whose decisions shaped the trajectory of history. And therein lies the true challenge. The world he steps into is fractured by political fear and social unrest. Those with extraordinary gifts, mutants, are not seen as saviors or equals, but as threats. They are hunted, distrusted, and divided among themselves. The one man who once represented hope, who once symbolized the possibility of peaceful coexistence, is now broken. His faith is gone, his strength drained, his voice silenced not by external enemies but by his own despair. When the protagonist finds him, it is not the leader of legend who greets him, but a shadow of that man, weary and unwilling to fight again. Convincing him to rise, to believe, to act once more is no simple task. It is not merely a matter of logic, but of rekindling a fire that has all but burned out. Yet, paradoxically, it is not the broken man who poses the greatest obstacle, but his old friend turned adversary. The other figure, magnetic in every sense of the word, has always walked a line between hero and villain, his worldview shaped by trauma and sharpened into conviction. To him, humans and mutants cannot coexist. The struggle is inevitable, and only dominance ensures survival. His choices, his actions, are at the heart of the history that must be rewritten. To change the future, they must change him, or at least stop him. But how does one convince someone whose very identity is built upon the certainty of conflict to choose another path? The story becomes a weaving of alliances and fractures, of seeking trust in a world where betrayal has become almost second nature. The journey takes them across landscapes marked by history, the remnants of war, the glitter of political power, the quiet spaces of personal pain. Each location carries weight, not just as a backdrop, but as a symbol of the era's turbulence. In one moment, the narrative is steeped in the paranoia of government institutions, shadowed by surveillance and the fear of the unknown. In another, it plunges into the intimacy of private conversations, where anger and grief simmer beneath the surface. As the group gathers, some willing, some reluctant, the plan becomes clearer, though no less perilous. A political assassination lies at the center of it all, a single act that spiraled outward into decades of chaos. Stop that act, change its course, and perhaps the sentinels will never rise, the future will never crumble, the world will never burn. But assassination is not merely an event. It is the culmination of wounds and choices, of ideologies clashing with human frailty. To intervene is to step into the most dangerous of spaces, the place where destiny and free will collide. Along the way, the story slows at unexpected moments, allowing us to glimpse not just the mechanics of the plan, but the humanity of those carrying it out. There are moments of levity, humor breaking through the heaviness like sunlight piercing storm clouds. There are moments of sorrow, quiet reflections on what has been lost and what might never be regained. These pauses matter. They remind us that this is not simply a tale of battles and strategies, but of people. People whose lives, loves, and pains are woven into the tapestry of history. And so the first half of the story builds like a gathering storm, drawing together strands of past and future, hope and despair. Every step forward feels both momentous and precarious, as though the ground itself could crumble at any moment. The characters, flawed and fractured, move not as archetypes of certainty but as echoes of humanity itself, seeking redemption, grappling with anger, reaching toward forgiveness, and stumbling under the weight of their choices. The stage is set, the players are assembled, and the question looms larger than ever. Can the future truly be rewritten, or is the past too deeply carved into stone? Every story is ultimately shaped not only by its plot, but by the people who inhabit it. They are the pulse beneath the spectacle, the breath in every conflict, the fragile humanity that gives grandeur its meaning. What makes this tale resonate so powerfully isn't only the battles, the time-crossing mission, or even the desperate race against fate. It's the characters themselves, fractured, flawed, yet endlessly compelling. They embody ideals and contradictions, wrestling with their scars and choices, and it is through them that the story truly lives. At the center stands the traveler, the man who shoulders the unbearable burden of memory. He is, by nature, a fighter, scarred both in body and spirit, hardened by years of surviving in a world that took almost everything from him. Yet beneath that exterior lies a flicker of tenderness, a desperate loyalty to those he calls his own. His role in this journey is more than that of a warrior. It is as a bridge between two eras, a messenger carrying both warning and hope. Unlike others, he cannot escape the future. He sees it in every blink, every heartbeat. His determination is forged from personal loss, but it is his resilience, his refusal to give in to despair, that drives him forward. The traveler is not without flaws. His temper can be his undoing, and his instinct to solve with claws rather than words makes him bristle against the subtler strategies of others. Yet paradoxically, it is this blunt honesty, this raw, unvarnished will to endure, that allows him to connect where others falter. In him, we see the embodiment of survival itself, battered yet unyielding. Counter to his hardened steel is the broken leader, a man of immense potential who begins the story hollowed by grief and disillusionment. Once his voice could rally thousands, his dream of unity standing as a beacon. But dreams, when shattered, cut deep, and his has left him bleeding in silence, retreating from the very world he once sought to heal. His paralysis is not merely physical but spiritual. He is haunted by the ghosts of those he failed, the weight of expectations crushing his spirit. Watching him claw his way back to hope is perhaps the most stirring transformation in the story. At first he resists, drowning in self-pity, rejecting pleas for leadership. But slowly, as the mission unfolds, we witness flickers of the man he once was, glimpses of the teacher, the father figure, the visionary. His rediscovery of faith in both himself and others is not instantaneous but fragile, earned step by step. And when he finally chooses to rise, to reclaim his voice, the moment resonates because it feels like a resurrection. Not from death, but from despair. He becomes not just a leader again, but a reminder of what conviction, tempered by compassion, can achieve. Standing across from him like a dark reflection is the magnetic one, a man consumed not only by power but by the righteousness of his own conviction. He is no simple villain. He is a survivor, a child forged in the crucible of humanity's darkest cruelty. His rage is not baseless. It is the response of one who has endured oppression and refuses to ever be helpless again. To him, coexistence is a lie, a comforting story meant to lull the powerless into submission. He believes with unwavering certainty that survival requires domination, that peace can only come when his kind rules without fear. His charisma makes him dangerous, his intelligence makes him unstoppable. And yet there is tragedy in him. Beneath the iron certainty is a man who once had friendship, who once shared a dream with the broken leader. That fracture, the betrayal of ideals, the splintering of brotherhood, is what drives their conflict and makes it so devastating. Every clash between them is layered with history, affection, and regret, making their rivalry as heartbreaking as it is thrilling. Then there is the assassin, the chameleon of the tale, whose identity is forever shifting, never fixed. She is more than a killer. She is the embodiment of betrayal and vengeance, shaped by years of rejection and loss. Her ability to take on any face is symbolic of her fractured self, never fully one thing, never fully belonging. Her anger is understandable. She has seen her kind hunted, tortured, reduced to experiments. To her, assassination is not an act of malice but of justice, the only language left to speak after compassion has been silenced. Yet it is her journey, her choice at the critical moment, that becomes the turning point of the entire narrative. Watching her wrestle with vengeance and the possibility of forgiveness is agonizing, because we see how much she has lost and how much she still could become. She is the heart of the story's moral dilemma, whether history is driven by rage or by the capacity to choose differently. And when she hesitates, when she allows the possibility of another path, it feels as if the universe itself exhales in relief. Around these central figures swirl others, each carrying their own weight. The inventor, pragmatic and brilliant, provides not only technical expertise, but a grounded wit that balances the gravitas of the others. He is skeptical, often cynical, yet beneath that lies a yearning for connection. His humor disguises loneliness, his cleverness masks insecurity. In the past, he becomes a reluctant ally, his cynicism tested by the idealism he once abandoned. His arc is quieter but no less profound, the reminder that even those who hide behind wit and intellect must eventually confront their own capacity for faith. In contrast, the metal-winged ally embodies purity of conviction, unwavering and steadfast. He is not the most complex character, but he represents the soldier's heart, loyal, disciplined, willing to stand against impossible odds. His presence in the future timeline, holding the line against unstoppable enemies, resonates as a testament to courage. He does not bend, does not falter, even when defeat seems certain. His sacrifice, though small in dialogue, is immense in impact, a reminder that not all heroes are defined by speeches or power, but by persistence in the face of annihilation. The psychic seer, with her calm strength and guiding presence, becomes the anchor of the desperate resistance. Her ability to peer across time is more than a power. It is a metaphor for vision, for seeing possibilities where others only see endings. She carries the burden of knowing what may come, yet never allows despair to overwhelm her. She nurtures the hope that change is possible, even as the sentinels close in. Her role is maternal, almost mythic, watching over the fragile flame of hope with unwavering devotion. And then there are the enemies, the sentinels themselves, soulless machines, yet chilling in what they represent. They are not villains in the traditional sense. They are humanity's fear made manifest, the embodiment of paranoia mechanized into extermination. Their adaptability makes them monstrous, but it is their origin, born from humanity's distrust, that makes them tragic. They remind us that evil is not always born from malice but from fear, and that fear, when weaponized, can be more destructive than hatred itself. Together, these characters form a tapestry of contradiction and resonance. None of them is purely good or evil. Each is scarred, each is driven by their own wounds and desires. That complexity is what makes the story so compelling. The traveler carries survival in his bones, yet longs for peace. The broken leader rediscovers hope, even as he doubts his own worth. The magnetic one fights for his people through domination, blinded by his pain. The assassin embodies rage, but holds within her the capacity for mercy. Each of them mirrors the central question. Are we bound by our pasts, or can we choose differently? What elevates their arcs is how intertwined they are. The protagonist's mission would mean nothing without the broken leader's recovery, the assassin's decision, or the magnetic one's challenge. Their struggles echo each other. One man's despair is another's conviction. One woman's vengeance is another's hope. They are not separate stories but threads of the same cloth, pulling and tearing at one another until, at last, a new pattern emerges. And so, when the resolution comes, it is not just victory but transformation. Each character, in their way, evolves. The traveler learns that brute force is not enough, that compassion and understanding can alter destinies. The broken leader reclaims his purpose, stepping once again into the role of visionary. The magnetic one, though still unyielding, is revealed in his tragic consistency, incapable of change, yet essential as the foil to hope. The assassin, most crucially, discovers within herself the strength to choose a different path, breaking free from the prison of vengeance. These arcs linger long after the story ends, not because they are fantastical, but because they are profoundly human. We recognize in them our own battles. The struggle to forgive, the temptation of bitterness, the difficulty of believing in second chances. They remind us that history, personal or collective, is never simple, and that the choice to change is both terrifying and liberating. In the end, the characters are the true heartbeat of the tale. Their powers, their conflicts, their grand battles. All of these are spectacular, yes, but it is the human soul beneath them that resonates. They are fractured mirrors, reflecting the best and worst of what we can be. Through them, the story becomes more than science fiction or spectacle. It becomes a meditation on identity, belief, and the possibility of redemption. And that is why, long after the machines are silenced and the timelines healed, we remember not only what they did, but who they were. The story of this film is remembered not only for its dazzling action or its clever weaving of timelines, but for the sheer weight carried by its characters. Each one feels like a living contradiction, a layered portrait of fear, hope, anger, or redemption. What keeps the narrative alive long after the credits fade isn't the spectacle of sentinels tearing through steel or the bending of time itself. It's the bruised humanity, the fractured ideals, and the desperate choices of those at its core. To understand the film, One must step inside these characters, feel the scars etched into them, and see how those wounds shape every decision they make. At the very center of the tale stands the wanderer, the man sent back across time, his mind torn between two lives. He is as much weapon as man, forged by decades of conflict, his very bones infused with violence. Yet, despite the metal grafted into his body, there remains something deeply human in him. An unyielding loyalty to those he calls family, and a stubborn refusal to give up when all seems lost. His role is more than that of a fighter. He is a bridge between past and future, carrying within him the knowledge of destruction, yet daring to believe it can be undone. His struggle is not easy. He bristles against authority, his instincts lean toward rage, and patience has never been his ally. But in a world teetering on annihilation, it is his grit, his refusal to surrender, that makes him indispensable. What is striking about his arc is how he learns, slowly and painfully, that survival alone is not enough, that sometimes true strength lies in restraint, in choosing not to unleash the claws but to trust in others. Then there is the broken visionary, once a man of profound dreams, now reduced to despair. He begins hollowed, shadows of failure clinging to him. He has lost too much, and the light that once illuminated his path has dimmed almost to nothing. Once his voice could rally others, inspire courage, build bridges between enemies. But when we meet him, he can barely inspire himself. His disillusionment is not weakness, but the natural collapse that comes from carrying too much responsibility, too much grief. His arc is not about gaining power, but reclaiming belief. He must remember who he was before sorrow silenced him, before the world broke him. Watching him rise again is like witnessing a flame struggle back to life after being nearly snuffed out. It flickers, it wavers, but when it catches, it burns brilliantly. His recovery is not only inspiring but essential, for without him, there is no dream, only survival. And survival without hope is not life at all. Across from him stands the magnetic revolutionary, a man shaped by trauma into an immovable force. His vision of the world is clear. Power ensures survival, mercy invites death. He carries in his soul the horrors of oppression, and those scars harden into rage. Yet he is not a villain in the simple sense. He is conviction incarnate, a man whose pain has convinced him that only domination will guarantee freedom. His charisma is undeniable. He speaks with authority, his words igniting others with the fire of his certainty. But beneath this iron mask lies tragedy, for he was once a friend, a brother in vision, to the broken leader. Their fracture is perhaps the story's deepest wound. Every confrontation between them is laced with regret, affection, and fury. One seeks to heal, the other to avenge, and together they mirror the eternal conflict between forgiveness and wrath. His role is not to be defeated but to stand as the unrelenting counterpoint, the shadow that forces light to define itself. Threaded through all of this is the shapeshifter, the assassin whose identity is never fixed. Her gift is transformation, but her curse is that she never belongs. She is anger and sorrow made flesh, molded by rejection into a weapon. Every face she wears is a disguise, but every choice she makes is raw truth. To her, vengeance is not cruelty, it is justice. She has seen her kind experimented on, hunted like animals, and she cannot believe in peace. And yet, her journey becomes the heartbeat of the entire narrative. For in her lies the question, is history defined by blood and violence, or can it be altered by a single moment of mercy? Her conflict is agonizing because we understand her pain. To expect her to forgive seems impossible. And yet, she is the one given the chance to change everything. Watching her wrestle with rage and compassion is like watching history itself teeter on a knife's edge. Her decision, small in gesture yet infinite in consequence, becomes the fulcrum of destiny. Surrounding these figures are others who bring depth and texture to the world. The inventor, whose wit cuts through tension, seems at first to be the least invested. Cynical, flippant, amused by the absurdity of it all, he hides behind sarcasm. But beneath that clever mask is a man yearning for connection, one who has buried his idealism beneath a shell of pragmatism. His journey is quieter but no less moving. He must decide whether to remain an observer, laughing at the chaos, or to step in and believe in something again. His humor provides balance, but his heart, once engaged, proves just as vital as any power. The soldier with wings of metal embodies a different kind of strength. He is not complex, not tormented by ideology, but steadfast in his loyalty. His presence in the resistance feels like a hymn to perseverance. He does not falter, even when faced with certain death. He stands, wings unfurled, against an unstoppable tide, reminding us that courage does not require complexity. Sometimes it is simply the refusal to bow, even when defeat is assured. His sacrifice lingers precisely because it is quiet, uncelebrated, yet immeasurably noble. Then there is the seer, calm and unwavering, whose gift of vision makes her almost ethereal. She peers into timelines, holding fragile threads of possibility in her hands. Yet she is not detached. She cares deeply, nurturing the hope that others might dismiss. She embodies resilience, the quiet strength that refuses to collapse under despair. Her presence is soothing, almost maternal, yet beneath her serenity is immense responsibility. She carries the burden of knowing countless futures, yet continues to believe in the one that can be saved. And finally, the machines, the sentinels, though soulless, bear meaning. They are not villains in the traditional sense, but mirrors of humanity's fear. They are born not of hatred but of paranoia, of the desperate urge to control what cannot be controlled. Their adaptability makes them monstrous, but it is their origin that is chilling. They are humanity's mistrust mechanized into extinction. In them we see how fear, when sharpened into policy and invention, becomes the very monster it seeks to destroy. What makes these characters extraordinary is not their powers but their flaws. Each is fractured, scarred by loss, driven by desperation. Their arcs are not linear but tangled, weaving in and out of one another. The wanderer cannot succeed without the broken visionary reclaiming his hope. The visionary cannot rise without confronting the revolutionary. The revolutionary cannot rage without the assassin standing as both ally and obstacle. And the assassin cannot choose without being seen by them all, not as a weapon, but as a person capable of change. The beauty lies in their interconnectedness. This is not a story of isolated heroes but of lives colliding, tearing, mending. Each choice ripples outward, altering not only fate but one another's hearts. When the assassin hesitates at the climax, it is because the wanderer's stubborn loyalty, the visionary's reclaimed hope, and even the revolutionary's relentless conviction have shaped her decision. When the visionary finally speaks again with the authority of a leader, it is because he has seen what the others are willing to sacrifice. These are not parallel arcs but braided threads, inseparable from one another. What lingers after the story concludes is the sense that these characters are not bound to fantasy. They are mirrors of ourselves. The wanderer reflects our instinct to survive, even when exhausted. The visionary mirrors our own moments of despair, when belief feels impossible, yet somehow must be found again. The revolutionary reflects the danger of letting pain calcify into vengeance, of becoming so hardened that compassion is lost. The assassin shows us the agony of betrayal, but also the terrifying freedom of forgiveness. Each speaks to something within us, something profoundly human. That is why the story endures. It is not the spectacle of timelines merging or powers unleashed. It is the ache in a man who thought he could no longer lead, the fury in another who cannot forgive, the hesitation in a woman who has lived too long in shadows, the relentless will of a man who refuses to quit. These are the truths we carry away, the recognition that hope is fragile, that choice is terrifying, but that both are possible. And through them, the film becomes not just entertainment but meditation. On survival, on belief, on the endless possibility of change. The story begins in silence. Well, not silence in the ordinary sense, but in that haunting stillness that often precedes catastrophe. Skies burn with fire, cities lie in ruin, and shadows of once proud monuments stretch over fields of ash. The opening event feels less like the prologue of a superhero tale, and more like a dirge for civilization. Sentinels hunt with merciless precision, their bodies morphing into lethal forms, their cold intelligence unshaken by compassion or hesitation. From a critical lens, this apocalyptic future is not merely spectacle. It is allegory. It reflects every nightmare humanity has ever had about its own creations turning against it, about the cost of fear dictating policy, about survival being devoured by the very tools built to ensure it. Audiences in 2014 felt this resonance sharply, especially in a world growing ever more entangled with surveillance and technology. The event sets the stakes not just for mutants, but for everyone who has ever wondered if humanity's paranoia might one day undo us. But from ashes comes resistance. The gathering of survivors is one of the most profound early beats. They are not polished heroes in capes but ragged warriors, their faces marked by years of exhaustion. They don't stand tall because they are fearless, they stand because they no longer have a choice. From a critical perspective, this small cluster of mutants becomes the embodiment of resilience itself. Their power is not their extraordinary abilities, but their refusal to let extinction be the last word. This collective, stitched together by grief and necessity, mirrors the real-world notion of oppressed communities finding solidarity amidst persecution. To see them, weary yet unbroken, immediately shifts the narrative tone. This is not about dominance or spectacle, but about endurance and hope surviving in fragments. Then arrives the decision that redefines the story's trajectory. Send a consciousness back through time. Critically, this moment operates on two levels. On the surface, it's a clever narrative device, a chance to merge timelines to reconcile decades of storytelling. But beneath it is philosophy in motion. Memory itself becomes the battleground. The mind, stretched between past and present, becomes the vessel of change. In a way, this acknowledges what literature has long taught us. History is not fixed stone but clay, malleable in the hands of memory and interpretation. The idea that one person can carry knowledge from one timeline into another speaks to humanity's deepest yearning, to learn from mistakes before repeating them. And it strikes at the core of reception, for viewers did not see it as just science fiction. They felt the allegory, that we too live at the mercy of whether we choose to remember, to correct, to alter our course before it's too late. The arrival in the past marks another significant pivot, not only for the plot, but for critical engagement. The tone shifts sharply from despair to possibility. 70s America bursts alive with color and dissonance, music, politics, suspicion, war, all bubbling in the backdrop. Here, the film speaks to history with deliberate texture. For an audience steeped in literature or cultural critique, the choice of this era is not accidental. The 1970s represent a world wrestling with identity, with protest movements rising, with governments mistrusted, with social fractures widening. To insert the mutant struggle into this context is to magnify its metaphorical power. Mutants, once more, mirror marginalized groups, mistrusted not for what they do but for what they are. And in the critical sphere, viewers cannot help but recognize the timeliness of this intersection. The way fiction reflects reality, amplifies it, and in doing so, makes commentary without a sermon. One of the most crucial events of this past setting unfolds when the Wanderer, the man sent to carry knowledge, seeks out the visionary who has fallen into despair. Their meeting is steeped in emotional weight. From a critical perspective, it dramatizes the clash between belief and disillusionment. The visionary, once the embodiment of ideals, now cloaked in shadows of self-pity, becomes a symbol of failed leadership and broken utopias. To witness his despair is to confront the reality that even the most radiant dreamers falter. Yet, the narrative insists on the possibility of redemption. This moment resonates deeply with audiences not just as character development, but as cultural reflection. How often have leaders in our own histories failed under the crushing weight of reality, only to rise again when reminded of the stakes? It is not just a plot beat, it is philosophy, a study of resilience in the human condition. Counterbalancing this is the event of Seeking Out the Magnetic Revolutionary. Where the visionary embodies the collapse of hope, the revolutionary embodies the calcification of trauma into vengeance. The critical lens must linger here, for this character's actions and ideology serve as an unrelenting challenge to the central themes of the story. He cannot be dismissed as evil, because he is built from experiences audiences recognize: persecution, grief, survival at any cost. When he insists that domination is the only answer, he articulates the seductive pull of rage, the temptation of violence when peace has failed. His clashes with the visionary are not simply confrontations between men but between philosophies, one that insists on healing, another that insists on revenge. For audiences, this event crystallizes one of the story's deepest thematic resonances. That progress, whether social or personal, cannot move forward until these two opposing forces, hope and rage, reckon with one another. And then, at the center of all of it, lies the assassin. Her eventful actions carry more weight than any other. When she infiltrates, when she strikes, when she narrowly escapes, these moments are charged not just with tension but with profound symbolism. She is the embodiment of choice. Every step she takes, every trigger she pulls or does not pull, becomes a pivot for history. Critically, her role transforms the narrative into a meditation on agency. The film does not rest its fate on gods or machines, but on the decision of one individual. A decision born not of grand speeches but of lived pain. For audiences, her arc reverberates beyond the screen. It forces them to ask, if history is shaped by choices, then whose choices? Whose anger is justified? And what does forgiveness mean when wounds run so deep? As the story presses toward its climax, the layering of events intensifies. The revolutionary seizes power, metal bending to his command, threatening to impose dominance not only over enemies but over allies as well. This sequence, when viewed critically, resonates as a parable of corrupted ideals. What begins as protection morphs into tyranny, mirroring the historical truth that revolutions often risk becoming the very oppression they sought to overthrow. His actions become a mirror held up to audiences, a reminder of the fragile line between freedom and control, between justice and vengeance. Meanwhile, the final confrontation with the assassin becomes the story's heartbeat. As she stands poised to kill, the entire narrative contracts into a single breath. Critically, this is the ultimate question posed. Is humanity defined by cycles of blood, or can a moment of mercy break the chain? For audiences, this scene lands with crushing emotional resonance. The silence before her decision feels longer than any battle could. It is the weight of history condensed into one gesture. And when she chooses differently, when she refuses to repeat the violence expected of her, the narrative unlocks hope itself. In that act, the story transcends spectacle. It becomes literature, myth, philosophy, an eternal question of whether redemption is ever truly possible. The resolution, when futures are rewritten, is not simply relief but catharsis. Critically, it speaks to the human hunger for second chances. To see the broken future vanish, to see lives restored, is not just narrative closure but emotional balm. Audiences responded with joy not because the story ended happily, but because it affirmed the possibility that mistakes, however dire, need not define forever. It echoed the timeless literary truth that hope, fragile though it may be, is the most radical force of all. Taken together, these events create more than entertainment. They build a meditation on survival, memory, forgiveness, and change. The apocalyptic opening warned of despair. The gatherings of survivors embodied resilience. The fractured leader and the raging revolutionary embodied the eternal conflict between hope and anger. The assassin's choice asked whether history could ever be rewritten not through power, but through mercy. And the conclusion reminded us all that, though the past cannot be erased, it can be healed. This is why the story continues to resonate. Critics and audiences alike recognized that its events were not bound to fantasy, but spoke to universal struggles. Fear, oppression, forgiveness, redemption. These are not the vocabulary of superheroes but of humanity itself. And in weaving them together, the film crafted a narrative that could be studied like literature, dissected like philosophy, and felt like memory. Its events, seen critically, are not just beats in a plot. They are echoes of truths we continue to wrestle with. When the idea of bringing this story to life was first sketched out on paper, it wasn't immediately clear just how immense the journey would become. What started as a vision to merge timelines and give audiences both nostalgia and innovation soon unraveled into a production of epic proportions. One that would test the endurance, creativity, and camaraderie of everyone involved. To watch the finished film is to see polish, spectacle, and seamless storytelling. But to look behind the curtain is to find a tapestry of painstaking detail, playful accidents, moments of frustration, and the sort of happy chaos that makes movie magic possible. The production itself was like a living organism, breathing, stumbling, correcting itself, and finally soaring into something extraordinary. The scale alone was daunting. Imagine a script that sought to unite two generations of characters, weaving together the narrative threads of previous films while also telling a story that could stand on its own. The writers had to juggle timelines, paradoxes, and character arcs without losing coherence. For the filmmakers, it meant balancing tone, fusing the gravitas of a dystopian future with the energy of a period piece set in the 1970s. The crew often described the experience as building two movies in one, each with its own rules, aesthetics, and rhythm. From a production standpoint, this duality was exhilarating and exhausting. The future sequences demanded bleak grandeur, while the past needed vibrant authenticity. This contrast fueled many of the most interesting decisions made during the shoot. One fascinating insight lies in how they captured that future apocalypse. The sets were intentionally built to feel claustrophobic, grim, almost suffocating. Ash and smoke machines ran constantly, covering the cast in fine dust that lingered on skin and in hair long after filming wrapped for the day. Crew members often joked that no amount of showers could erase the end of the world from their pores. Lighting was meticulously engineered to bounce cold, sterile hues off metallic structures, amplifying the lifelessness of the Sentinel's reign. And yet, amid this bleakness, The camaraderie among the cast was surprisingly warm. Between takes, the actors who played battle-hardened survivors often laughed, swapped snacks, and teased one another as though in rebellion against the grimness of their environment. This contradiction became one of the production's most beautiful quirks. Despair on camera, joy behind it. Shifting to the 1970s sequences required an entirely different energy. The production design department dove headfirst into history, scouring thrift stores, vintage warehouses, and even collectors' attics to find authentic props and clothing. They wanted audiences to feel submerged in the decade, not just visually but texturally. Wardrobe fittings became events of their own, with actors donning polyester suits, patterned shirts, flared pants, and oversized sunglasses. The atmosphere on set changed too, brighter lighting, more saturated colors, and even the music playing during breaks reflected the shift. Cast members reported feeling a kind of cultural whiplash when moving between shooting days in the future and those in the past. It wasn't just costume or makeup. It was like living two separate existences stitched together by call sheets and director's notes. Among the most memorable behind-the-scenes stories is the filming of the Pentagon prison break sequence. This set piece was ambitious in concept, the liberation of a magnetic revolutionary from the depths of an underground facility. To execute it, the team had to construct elaborate sets with multiple levels, corridors, and security systems. The moving parts of the scene, guards, security cameras, bullet trajectories, all had to be synchronized to perfection. But the true star of that sequence was a speedster whose powers demanded one of the most groundbreaking visual experiments of the production. To capture his perspective, the crew invented an entirely new way of filming time. High-speed cameras capable of thousands of frames per second were employed, alongside an intricate ballet of practical and digital effects. Actors and stunt performers had to freeze in unnatural poses while props, like flying bullets or spilled soup, were carefully rigged to hang suspended. One anecdote reveals just how grueling this was. Extras spent hours holding still as though caught mid-motion, muscles trembling, while the cameras captured the tiniest flickers of detail. Between takes, laughter would often erupt when someone sneezed, twitched, or dropped a spoon, sending the entire setup back to square one. Despite the frustration, everyone knew they were building something unforgettable. When the finished sequence hit the screen, it wasn't just a highlight of the film but a landmark moment in superhero cinema. Not all challenges, however, were planned or welcome. The unpredictability of weather played its part, especially in outdoor shoots meant to replicate historical events. During one crucial scene staged at a political rally, sudden rain threatened to ruin the elaborate costumes and delicate period-specific props. Crew members scrambled to cover cameras and protect electronics while actors huddled under umbrellas, laughing at the absurdity of trying to save the 1970s from a downpour. Eventually, the rain cleared, and the scene was completed, but not without leaving everyone drenched and shivering. Ironically, the ordeal bonded the cast and crew even more tightly, transforming what could have been a disaster into a cherished memory. Fun facts often emerge from such mishaps. For example, during the filming of a tense standoff in a government building, one of the extras accidentally knocked over a prop table, sending papers flying everywhere. Instead of cutting the scene, the director encouraged the actors to keep going, improvising around the chaos. The moment was later praised for its authenticity, proof that accidents, when embraced, can become artistry. In another instance, a stunt sequence involving levitating stadium pieces required actors to balance on moving platforms while surrounded by green screens. Crew members reportedly nicknamed the rig the Mutant Merry-Go-Round, as the cast swayed and laughed nervously between takes, joking that they were training for a circus rather than a superhero film. Another delightful tidbit concerns the attention to detail in historical accuracy. To portray a world steeped in 1970s politics, the production team included countless Easter eggs, posters of real-world events, period-accurate magazines, and even functioning rotary phones. During downtime, some actors amused themselves by making calls on those phones, spinning the rotary dial with fascination as if it were alien technology. Younger cast members who had never used one before reportedly struggled to figure it out, leading to plenty of playful teasing from older colleagues. The filmmakers also made conscious efforts to balance CGI with practical effects whenever possible. Explosions were staged physically, with stunt performers rehearsing countless times to ensure safety while maintaining realism. One of the crew's proudest achievements was a massive practical set piece involving a political summit, where dozens of extras, cars, and moving parts were coordinated in a single continuous shot. The complexity was staggering, timing cues. Pyrotechnics, dialogue delivery, and camera movement had to align flawlessly. After multiple failed attempts, when the final take was nailed, the set erupted in applause, with crew members hugging each other as if celebrating a championship win. Yet amid all the intensity, there were moments of levity that softened the grind. Pranks became a sort of tradition on set. One day, during a heavy emotional scene, a cast member replaced his serious dialogue with a completely absurd line from a children's cartoon, sending everyone into fits of laughter. On another occasion, a prop meant to represent a futuristic device was secretly swapped out with a rubber chicken, leaving the actor who picked it up utterly baffled mid-take. These playful acts of rebellion against the grueling schedule helped keep spirits high and reminded everyone that, beneath the weight of storytelling, they were there to enjoy themselves. From a broader perspective, one of the most remarkable insights into the production is how collaboration defined its success. The blending of casts from two different eras, the veterans who had embodied their roles for over a decade and the newer faces carrying fresh energy, could have been awkward, even competitive. Instead, it became one of the film's greatest strengths. The older cast members often mentored the younger ones, sharing stories of earlier productions, offering advice, and creating an atmosphere of family. The newcomers, in turn, brought vitality and excitement, infusing the set with enthusiasm that lifted even the weariest veterans. This intergenerational exchange mirrored the narrative itself, where past and future had to work together to survive. Looking back, what makes the production so fascinating isn't simply the scale of its achievements or the innovation of its techniques. It's the humanity woven through every anecdote. It's the extras trying not to sneeze in slow-motion scenes, the rainstorms that forced everyone to huddle together, the jokes that diffused tension, the camaraderie that turned grueling days into unforgettable ones. These behind-the-scenes moments remind us that films are not forged by machines or effects, but by people. People who stumble, laugh, argue, and dream together until the story is finally told. And perhaps that is the greatest fun fact of all, that in creating a tale about survival, resilience, and unity, the production itself lived out those very themes. The crew endured exhaustion, the cast carried emotional weight, and yet together they forged something that would resonate far beyond its opening weekend. Behind every frame lies 1,000 untold stories, each a reminder that cinema, at its heart, is as much about the journey of making it as the story it tells. The magic of cinema often lies not only in the performances or the dialogue, but in the spaces where stories unfold, the cities, landscapes, and rooms that cradle the characters and their journeys. When we speak of this particular film, it is impossible to ignore how profoundly the settings become part of the narrative, almost as if the environments themselves are silent characters shaping the fate of everyone within them. Watching it is not simply about observing heroes and villains, it's about feeling drawn into a world where each location holds significance. Every backdrop whispers meaning, and the visual language of cinematography breathes life into atmosphere, tone, and theme. The story begins in the cold shadow of a dystopian future. These opening sequences are bathed in steel and ash, with towering structures that resemble mausoleums rather than cities. The settings here are suffocating, deliberately stripped of warmth, their very design reminding us of a humanity eroded by machinery and war. The ground is littered with rubble, skies blackened by smoke, and the architecture is all sharp edges and functional brutality. The production designers sought to conjure a world that felt both futuristic and terrifyingly plausible, with locations reflecting the dominance of the Sentinels, mechanical enforcers who have drained color and vitality from human life. Here, the mood is claustrophobic, almost funereal, and the cinematography reinforces this with cold blue filters, hard contrasts, and wide shots that emphasize both desolation and entrapment. What fascinates me most is how these settings operate on two levels: literal space and metaphorical landscape. The bleak halls and decaying structures of the future are not simply scenery. They mirror the despair of characters who have survived too long under oppression. Cinematography amplifies this. Lingering shots of shadows across walls, low-angle perspectives that make even survivors appear small against vast, crumbling backdrops. These elements remind us of literature's Gothic tradition, where environments themselves carry psychological weight, embodying fear and decay. The future here is not merely a place. It is an externalization of hopelessness. But just as despair threatens to consume the story, the setting shifts abruptly to the past, the 1970s, in a striking contrast that redefines the film's atmosphere. Suddenly, we are transported to a world alive with texture. Shag carpets, wood-paneled rooms, sprawling urban landscapes, and the unmistakable chaos of an era in transition. The locations chosen to represent this decade are infused with historical authenticity, down to the smallest details of architecture and props. Government offices brim with bulky typewriters, rotary phones, and buzzing fluorescent lights. Streets are filled with boxy cars and bright billboards. Even the color palette shifts. The washed-out blues of the future give way to golden browns, mustard yellows, and deep reds, a deliberate choice by the cinematographers to evoke warmth, earthiness, and the slightly faded glamour of the era. One particularly striking setting is the Pentagon, reimagined here as both fortress and stage for one of the film's most memorable sequences. Its sterile hallways, endless staircases, and labyrinthine corridors reflect not only institutional power but also confinement. The camera work within these scenes is tight and controlled, capturing both the claustrophobia of the environment and the intensity of the character's mission. Lighting plays a crucial role. Harsh fluorescents reflect off polished floors, creating an oppressive brightness that feels almost interrogative, as though the very walls are conspiring against those within. In contrast, the escape that unfolds in this space is rendered with playful irreverence through slow motion and high-speed cinematography, turning a suffocating setting into a playground for chaos. Equally compelling is the suburban American setting, where quiet neighborhoods and political rallies unfold with deceptive normalcy. These spaces anchor the narrative in a recognizable reality, reminding us of the stakes, the fate of ordinary people, families, and communities. The cinematography here softens. Handheld shots, warmer lighting, and wider angles create a sense of intimacy and connection. The settings reinforce the idea that history itself is fragile, shaped not only by leaders and armies, but by the everyday spaces in which lives are lived. And then, there are the grand stages of history recreated with meticulous detail: political arenas, international summits, sprawling lawns filled with reporters and protesters. The production designers poured immense effort into reconstructing the aesthetics of 1970s media culture. Bulky cameras slung over journalists' shoulders, news vans with spinning antennas, flashbulbs popping like fireworks. The cinematography leans into this spectacle, often adopting documentary-style framing to mimic the look of actual historical footage. The result is an uncanny blend of fiction and reality, where audiences are invited to suspend disbelief and immerse themselves in the what-if of history rewritten. What makes the film's use of settings so compelling is how they enhance not only narrative but theme. Consider the contrast between future and past. One bleak and colorless, the other rich and chaotic. The juxtaposition speaks to the fragility of time, the hope that by revisiting old wounds, one might prevent devastation. Cinematography mirrors this contrast in every frame, the future bathed in shadows, the past glowing with earthy tones. It's almost as if the filmmakers are telling us, through light and texture, that the possibility of redemption lies in the imperfect messiness of humanity's past rather than the sterile certainty of its future. Take, for instance, the rural landscapes that occasionally interrupt the urban sprawl. Wide shots of fields, forests, and skies create visual relief, offering audiences a breath of fresh air amid the tension. These natural settings embody hope and continuity, reminders that beyond politics and war, the earth itself persists. Cinematography embraces these moments with sweeping crane shots, sun-drenched angles, and slower pacing, inviting us to linger in beauty before the narrative plunges back into chaos. Symbolism, too, is embedded in these settings. The prison, with its towering walls and subterranean cells, becomes a metaphor for repression and control, a literal manifestation of characters' struggles against forces that seek to confine them. The political summit, staged on a national stage and framed with grandeur, symbolizes the weight of human decisions, moments where history pivots on fragile ground. Even small settings like hotel rooms or laboratories carry significance, spaces of planning, secrecy, invention, and betrayal. Each location is chosen with intention, each angle carefully framed to reinforce meaning. Perhaps the most haunting setting of all is the stadium scene. A coliseum uprooted and levitated, its massive structure casting shadows over a cityscape. It is spectacle and terror combined. This moment encapsulates the film's ability to blend grandiosity with symbolism. The stadium, traditionally a place of games and spectacle, becomes a weapon of intimidation, transformed into a monstrous cage. Cinematography captures this with sweeping aerial shots, low angles emphasizing scale, and deliberate pacing that allows the weight of the imagery to sink in. It is not merely a display of power, but a statement about the perversion of cultural symbols into instruments of fear. Throughout, the film's cinematography is deeply literary in its execution. It relies not just on capturing movement, but on layering visual metaphors, creating juxtapositions that invite interpretation. Darkness and light are not simply aesthetic choices, they embody despair and hope. Color palettes are not random. They are psychological cues that tether us to mood and theme. Camera movement itself becomes storytelling. Frenetic in moments of chaos, fluid and steady in times of revelation. Even silence, framed in still shots, communicates more than dialogue ever could. As I reflect on these choices, I cannot help but think of how settings in literature often function. In novels, cities, landscapes, and rooms are imbued with meaning, becoming mirrors of characters' inner lives. Here, too, the filmmakers embrace that tradition. The dystopian halls of the future echo the hopelessness of its survivors. The sunlit sprawl of the 1970s reflects the chaotic possibility of change. The stadium in the sky becomes the terrifying embodiment of hubris. These are not mere backdrops. They are narrative devices, as essential to the story as any line of dialogue or turn of plot. And perhaps that is the film's greatest triumph in terms of setting and cinematic elements. It reminds us that worlds are not just constructed for characters to inhabit, they shape and are shaped by those characters, becoming as alive and dynamic as any protagonist. The careful interplay of production design, location, cinematography, and symbolism creates a tapestry where every detail carries weight. Watching the film feels like walking through a novel brought to life, each page translated into architecture, color, and light. The effect on the viewer is profound. We do not merely follow a story, we inhabit it, moving through spaces that feel tangible and emotionally resonant. We feel the chill of sterile corridors, the warmth of sunlit streets, the awe of monumental spectacles. We sense despair in shadowed ruins and hope in glowing skylines. The settings are not places we watch from afar. They are environments that pull us in, immersing us in the texture of the narrative. And when the credits finally roll, what lingers in memory is not only the characters' choices, but the places where those choices unfolded. The desolate ruins of the future, the vibrant chaos of the past, the monumental spectacles of power and protest, all remain imprinted on the imagination, as inseparable from the story as the characters themselves. The film's settings and cinematic elements remind us that storytelling is not just about what happens, but where it happens, and how those spaces are framed for us to see, feel, and interpret. When we watch a film that feels seamless, where every scene flows with natural rhythm and every performance appears effortless, it's tempting to believe that it all came together with the same ease we see on screen. But the truth, as with most works of art, is far more intricate, and often far more fascinating. Behind the polished final cut lies a world of long days, unpredictable accidents, surprising friendships, and creative problem-solving that sometimes feels as dramatic as the movie itself. And with this film, the story of its making is every bit as compelling as the narrative we see on screen. What makes the behind-the-scenes journey so extraordinary is how it blends the practical demands of filmmaking with the unpredictable human element. Crews can design the most meticulous production schedules, storyboard every shot, and plan every camera angle. But once hundreds of people gather on set, with personalities, egos, and tempers occasionally flaring, the reality is always full of surprises. And this project, bold and ambitious in its scale, was no exception. One of the most delightful aspects of the production was the chemistry that developed among the cast. These weren't just actors sharing screen time. They became, for the duration of filming, a kind of surrogate family. Days on set were long, often stretching beyond 12 hours, but within those stretches came small pockets of joy. Between takes, it wasn't uncommon for the cast to break into laughter, improvise little skits, or challenge each other to friendly competitions. Word spread quickly among the crew about one actor's uncanny ability to mimic colleagues, sometimes so perfectly that people swore they were hearing their own voice bouncing back at them. Those impressions, shared over lunch breaks or in the corners of rehearsal rooms, kept morale high during the more grueling stretches of production. There was also a mischievous streak among the younger cast members. One day, during a particularly tense sequence being shot in a grand, echoing hall, a prop mysteriously went missing. Panic rippled briefly across the crew. The item was integral to the scene and would delay filming if not found. Hours later, the mystery was solved. One of the younger actors had tucked it away in a lighting rig as part of a prank, waiting gleefully for someone to discover it. Though exasperated at first, the director couldn't help but laugh, and the tension that had been hovering in the air for days suddenly dissipated. Yet not every surprise on set was lighthearted. Filming involved complex stunts, intricate choreography, and heavy use of practical effects, which meant danger was always a looming possibility. One of the more harrowing incidents occurred during the filming of a large set piece involving pyrotechnics. The explosion was carefully timed, the safety rehearsals endless, and the crew thought they had every contingency covered. But when the moment came, the fireball grew larger than expected, singeing part of the set and rattling even the most seasoned stunt performers. Miraculously, no one was injured, but the incident became a sobering reminder of the razor-thin line between controlled chaos and genuine peril. Afterward, safety protocols were tightened even further, and crew members later joked about how they had survived the day the set tried to eat us alive. Even with these challenges, what stands out most about the production is how often problems were turned into opportunities for creativity. A memorable example involves a sequence that was supposed to be shot outdoors, capturing the golden glow of sunset. But nature had other plans. Clouds rolled in, rain poured, and the carefully scheduled moment slipped away. Instead of scrapping the day's work, the cinematographer made a bold suggestion. Why not lean into the storm? The scene was reimagined, with characters walking under umbrellas, their dialogue underscored by the steady rhythm of rain. The resulting footage carried a melancholic beauty that none of the original plans could have achieved, and the accident of weather became one of the film's most poetic sequences. The set was also a laboratory for unexpected friendships. Actors who might not have crossed paths outside of this project found themselves spending long hours in trailers, waiting for their scenes, or huddled together on cold nights between takes. Bonds formed over shared exhaustion, late-night conversations, and often food. One actor in particular became known for always bringing homemade treats to share, baked late at night after long shooting days. These simple acts of generosity created a sense of community that sustained everyone through the most demanding parts of production. But camaraderie alone couldn't solve every problem. There were moments when creative visions clashed, and directors, writers, and producers found themselves locked in heated debates about how a scene should unfold. At one point, an argument over the ending grew so tense that filming halted entirely for a full day while the creative team reworked the sequence. These moments were difficult, but they also underscored the passion driving everyone involved. Nobody was content with good enough. The stakes were too high, the story too important. And when the dust settled, the resolution often led to stronger, sharper storytelling. The crew's resourcefulness was put to the test repeatedly. In one instance, a key prop broke just before shooting. Instead of delaying production, the art department scrambled to rebuild it overnight, working with little more than spare parts and caffeine. By morning, the prop was ready, and most of the cast never knew the difference. Another time, a location unexpectedly became unavailable due to bureaucratic red tape. Rather than despair, the production designers transformed a nearby warehouse into a convincing replica, using clever lighting and set dressing to create an illusion, so convincing that even seasoned critics assumed it had been shot on location. Perhaps the most humanizing stories are those that reveal the vulnerability of the cast. Despite their larger-than-life performances, many actors admitted to feeling nervous, even overwhelmed at times. Some scenes demanded raw emotional vulnerability, others required physical endurance far beyond their comfort zones. In these moments, the support of fellow cast members proved invaluable. There are stories of actors staying on set long after their scenes had wrapped, just to be there for their colleagues during difficult takes, offering encouragement or simply a reassuring presence. And then there were the moments of sheer absurdity, the kind that could only happen in the controlled chaos of a film set. Like the time a carefully choreographed stunt went awry because a wayward pigeon flew directly into the frame, breaking the tension and sending the entire crew into laughter. Or the day an actor, struggling with a particularly heavy costume, tripped spectacularly over a prop, only to rise with a grin and declare it the best blooper of the year. These mishaps, though frustrating in the moment, became the stories everyone remembered most fondly, the moments that reminded them why they loved the unpredictable, maddening, exhilarating world of filmmaking. What strikes me about these behind-the-scenes stories is how they mirror the themes of the film itself. resilience in the face of adversity, the importance of collaboration, and the unexpected beauty that emerges from chaos. Just as the characters within the story grapple with monumental challenges, so too did the people bringing that story to life. And just as the narrative arcs toward redemption and hope, the making of the film was ultimately defined not by its struggles, but by the triumph of overcoming them together. When audiences finally see the finished work, they may never know about the fireball that burned too hot, the prop rebuilt in the dead of night, or the pigeon that briefly became an uninvited co-star. But in a way, those hidden stories add another layer of richness to the experience. They remind us that cinema is not only about the illusion crafted on screen, it is also about the hundreds of human hands, hearts, and minds behind it, each contributing in ways both grand and small. And perhaps that is why we find ourselves so fascinated by behind-the-scenes insights. They strip away the veneer of perfection and reveal the messy, unpredictable humanity at the core of filmmaking. They show us that art is not born in silence and serenity, but in the laughter of friends, the panic of last-minute improvisation, and the shared determination to create something meaningful despite the odds. And in this film, that humanity is everywhere, woven into every frame, hidden behind every scene, waiting for us to discover it. Themes and symbolism often feel like the soul of a film, those subtle layers that hum beneath the surface, shaping our emotions and guiding us toward deeper truths without ever shouting them aloud. And in this story, those layers are rich and plentiful, inviting us to peel them back slowly, like uncovering hidden inscriptions etched into ancient stone. What at first glance might appear to be an action-driven spectacle reveals itself, upon closer reflection, to be a meditation on memory, sacrifice, power, and the very fragile hope of redemption. When I think about the themes at work here, I often picture them as threads of different colors, woven together into the same tapestry. Some are bold and impossible to miss, like the exploration of survival in a fractured world. Others are so faint they might escape notice unless you linger on them, such as the quiet yearning for identity and belonging that drives many of the characters forward. But every single thread matters, every one is tied to the others, and together they create something far greater than the sum of their parts. One of the most striking themes is the battle between fate and free will. The story is built on the idea that the future is both terrifyingly inevitable and yet strangely malleable, shaped by the choices of individuals who dare to challenge it. There is a haunting sense of predestination in the world depicted here, a vision of destruction, persecution, and despair. And yet, despite the overwhelming weight of this looming catastrophe, characters cling to the idea that their actions in the present might reshape what is to come. This tension between destiny and agency becomes the backbone of the narrative, asking us as viewers whether we believe the course of history can ever truly be altered, or whether we are condemned to walk the same cycles over and over again. The symbolism that underscores this theme is equally powerful. Time itself becomes more than just a backdrop for the story. It is almost a character, shifting and reshaping, a living entity that both traps and liberates those who interact with it. The constant back and forth between past and future mirrors the internal struggles of the characters, torn between who they have been and who they might yet become. Even the act of sending someone's consciousness across decades serves as a potent metaphor for memory. The way we carry the weight of our past choices into the present moment, never able to fully separate ourselves from what has come before. Another core theme that reverberates throughout the film is sacrifice. Nearly every character is called upon to give something of themselves for the sake of others, sometimes in small, quiet ways, and sometimes in devastatingly final ones. Sacrifice here is not only about heroic selflessness. It is also about the painful acknowledgement that true progress often comes at a personal cost. In the ruins of the future, we see lives lived entirely in the service of survival, where each moment is a gamble against annihilation. In the past, the sacrifices are more psychological. Characters must give up illusions, betray old loyalties, or face parts of themselves they would rather bury. And at the heart of it all lies the question, what are we willing to give up in order to build a better world, and what happens if we give too much? Symbolism amplifies this theme as well. The Sentinels, those towering, relentless machines, are not just antagonists, they embody the brutal consequences of fear left unchecked. They are physical manifestations of humanity's willingness to sacrifice morality for the illusion of safety, creations born from paranoia that ultimately turn against their makers. Each towering figure represents both a weapon and a warning, When fear dictates our choices, we risk building the very monsters that will destroy us. Their shifting, adaptive forms, able to mimic the strengths of those they hunt, also symbolize the insidious way prejudice evolves, constantly finding new shapes, new excuses to justify itself. The theme of identity is woven delicately but powerfully into the narrative. Many characters grapple with who they truly are and how the world perceives them. The story asks, are we defined by the worst parts of ourselves or by the choices we make to rise above them? For some, identity is a prison, shaped by past mistakes or by the labels others place upon them. For others, identity is a weapon, something to wield in defiance of a world that seeks to erase them. This tension reflects the broader human struggle to reconcile personal truth with external judgment. Here, symbolism emerges most clearly through transformation, both literal and figurative. Characters who can shift their form, who can appear as anyone, embody the precariousness of identity itself. They are walking metaphors for the masks we all wear, for the tension between how we present ourselves and who we are beneath. But beyond the literal, even the act of time travel functions symbolically as a transformation of identity, a way of confronting the self across different moments in life. The younger and older versions of characters stand as mirrors to each other, forcing them, and us, to consider whether true change is possible or whether we are doomed to repeat our mistakes. Hope, fragile and yet unyielding, is perhaps the most enduring theme. In the darkest visions of the future, when the world seems irreparably broken, hope still flickers. It is not loud or triumphant. It is quiet, often whispered between characters in small gestures of trust or forgiveness. But it endures, and that endurance becomes the foundation of everything else. Without hope, the sacrifices would be meaningless, the struggles against fate futile. With hope, even the most desperate battles carry weight, because they are fought not only for survival but for the chance of something better. The symbolism here is simple yet profound. Light itself becomes a recurring motif. Tiny flames burning in the shadows, shafts of sunlight breaking through ruined landscapes, moments where darkness is pierced, however briefly, by illumination. These visual cues remind us that even in the bleakest times, hope is never entirely extinguished. The very structure of the narrative, oscillating between despair and possibility, mirrors this theme, constantly pulling us back and forth between endings and beginnings, reminding us that both are always possible. Another theme worth exploring is unity versus division. The film presents a fractured world where mistrust and betrayal have carved deep wounds, but it also suggests that only through collective effort can survival and progress be achieved. The most powerful victories come not from individual strength, but from collaboration, from the willingness to put aside grudges and differences in pursuit of something greater. This theme resonates not only in the context of the story, but also in our own world, where division so often feels easier than unity, yet where true change requires the latter. Symbolism underscores this theme through imagery of barriers and bridges. Walls, both literal and figurative, appear throughout the story. Boundaries between past and future, between humans and mutants, between individuals and their own inner selves. But alongside these walls, there are bridges, moments of connection, acts of forgiveness, gestures of solidarity. The contrast between the two becomes a visual shorthand for the struggle between division and unity, reminding us of the fragile balance that shapes both personal and collective destinies. As I reflect on these themes, what strikes me most is how deeply they connect to the characters themselves. Each theme is not an abstract idea floating above the story, but is embodied in the people who inhabit it. Fate and free will are lived out in the choices of those who fight to alter their destinies. Sacrifice is etched into the faces of characters who give everything they have for those they love. Identity is a wound and a weapon, shaping every interaction. Hope is carried in whispered promises and determined glances. Unity is forged, often painfully, in the crucible of shared struggle. In this way, the themes and symbolism do more than add depth to the story. They become inseparable from it, the very framework that makes it resonate so deeply. They transform what might have been a straightforward tale of conflict into something far more profound, a meditation on what it means to be human, to struggle, to fail, and to rise again. They remind us that every battle, no matter how grand, is at its core about the choices we make, the identities we claim, the sacrifices we bear, the hopes we nurture, and the unity we strive toward. And perhaps that is the true power of this film. Not simply in its spectacle, not only in its action or drama, but in the way it whispers to us about the deepest parts of ourselves. The themes are universal, the symbols timeless, and through them, the story becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a mirror, reflecting our fears, our struggles, and most importantly, our capacity for hope. Filmmaking techniques, when done right, feel almost invisible. They weave themselves so seamlessly into the experience that we don't always stop to realize how much they're shaping the way we feel, breathe, and respond as we watch a story unfold. Yet when you peel back the layers, when you look at the brushstrokes of the artist rather than only the finished painting, you see just how much intention, craft, and daring imagination go into every moment on screen. In this particular film, the techniques employed by the creative team were nothing short of revolutionary. Not because they shouted loudly for attention, but because they sculpted an atmosphere so immersive that audiences could hardly resist being pulled deep into its world. The first thing that comes to mind when reflecting on its craftsmanship is how camera work set the tone. The directors and cinematographers seem to understand instinctively that movement is emotion. Wide sweeping shots didn't just show landscapes, they breathed life into them, making us feel as though we were stepping directly into that world ourselves. Low-angle frames gave the characters a sense of towering presence, infusing their struggles with gravitas. Then there were the intimate close-ups, quiet but potent, which captured the subtle flicker of doubt in a glance or the tremor of resolve in a clenched jaw. Each frame was composed with a painter's eye, layered with intention, as though the camera was not just recording a story, but translating the unspoken language of the soul. Editing, too, played a remarkable role in guiding the audience's emotions. This wasn't just about cutting from one scene to another, but about rhythm, about knowing when to linger and when to jolt us forward. The pacing shifted like a heartbeat. During high-stakes sequences, cuts came fast, each edit like the drumbeat of anxiety rising in our chests. Yet in moments of reflection, the film allowed itself to breathe, holding the frame just a second longer than expected, coaxing us into contemplation. That deliberate tempo was crucial. It kept us locked in suspense, then allowed us moments of release, much like a symphony balancing crescendos with rests. Without such careful editing, the narrative could have easily unraveled into chaos, but instead it flowed with elegance and urgency in equal measure. Sound, perhaps more than any other element, carried the emotional weight of the story. The score wasn't merely background music. It was a voice of its own, sometimes whispering, sometimes roaring. Strings surged like waves during climactic battles, while softer tones, almost imperceptible at first, underscored tender exchanges, giving them weight without intruding. Beyond the score, the sound design itself was a marvel. The clank of machinery, the distant echo of footsteps in a vast corridor, the rush of wind across an open plain, all of these auditory details built an atmosphere that was tactile, textured, and alive. You didn't just watch this world, you heard it breathing around you. Lighting, too, was wielded with symbolic purpose. Shadows weren't simply byproducts of setting, but were tools of storytelling. Darkness fell heavy during moments of despair, swallowing characters whole, while sudden bursts of brightness often coincided with fleeting glimpses of hope. The contrast between muted palettes and rich tones created a visual rhythm that echoed the narrative's central conflicts, between despair and possibility, destruction and rebirth. Even color itself served as a kind of silent narrator. Cold hues dominated the bleak future, painting it as lifeless and drained, while warmer tones glowed in the past, carrying a fragile sense of possibility. The result was not just a story told through dialogue and action, but one expressed through light and color themselves. Another fascinating technique lay in the interplay of practical and digital effects. Where many films lean heavily into computer-generated imagery, this production struck a remarkable balance. Practical sets grounded the world in tactile reality, dust swirling across the desert, water splashing with real weight, the grit of crumbling stone underfoot, while digital enhancements expanded the scope, giving us glimpses of things beyond the reach of physical construction. This marriage of the tangible and the imagined created a seamless experience. Audiences never felt jarred by the shift between real and artificial because both worked in harmony to craft a cohesive reality. It was an illusion so complete that disbelief wasn't just suspended, it was erased. Performance, though often considered separate from technique, was profoundly shaped by directorial choices. The filmmakers allowed their actors space to breathe into their roles, encouraging naturalistic performances even in a heightened fantastical context. This choice elevated the film, because while the world around the characters was extraordinary, the emotions grounding them were real. The use of handheld shots during certain confrontations, for instance, brought us uncomfortably close to the characters' vulnerability, amplifying the authenticity of their struggles. By contrast, sweeping Steadicam sequences during battles conveyed the inevitability of their conflicts, a visual metaphor for the tides of history that no single person could control. One cannot overlook the choreography of action sequences, which functioned almost like ballets of violence and survival. Every movement was precise, not chaotic. The camera didn't flail wildly in an attempt to mimic intensity. Instead, it guided us carefully through the action, ensuring that we could follow each beat while still feeling the chaos of the moment. This was a lesson in restraint, in trusting the audience's intelligence and capacity to engage, rather than overwhelming them with noise. That choice reflected a kind of respect for viewers, one that elevated the film beyond spectacle into something closer to art. When considering how all these techniques shaped the atmosphere, it's impossible not to marvel at the result. A world that felt both vast and intimate, epic yet deeply personal. The techniques never sought to overshadow the story. They worked in quiet partnership with it, amplifying emotions, reinforcing themes, and drawing us deeper into the experience without ever once breaking the illusion. They made the impossible feel real, not by demanding our belief, but by quietly earning it. Of course, filmmaking is only one part of the larger journey. Once the story was crafted, filmed, and polished, another equally fascinating chapter began. The journey into the world of box office production. Here, artistry collided with commerce, and the results were telling. The film's release was a gamble of sorts, though one that paid off handsomely. The budget had been considerable, an investment of not only financial resources, but also creative risk. Studios had poured energy into marketing campaigns that painted the film as both a spectacle and a thoughtful exploration of themes that resonated across cultures. Trailers teased breathtaking visuals, but they also hinted at the depth of character conflict, drawing in audiences who craved more than surface-level thrills. Opening weekend was electric. Crowds flocked to theaters, drawn by the promise of something both thrilling and meaningful. What happened next was remarkable. Word of mouth spread quickly, not only praising the visual grandeur, but also the emotional resonance. It wasn't just the effects or the action that people left talking about. It was the ideas, the performances, the way it lingered with them long after the credits rolled. That rare combination of spectacle and substance is what transformed the film from a simple box office success into a cultural event. The global response was equally telling. In markets across the world, audiences connected with the story in ways that transcended language. Its themes of survival, hope, and identity resonated universally, making it more than a regional success. Box office numbers climbed steadily, surpassing expectations and cementing the film as a cornerstone of its genre. For the studio, it was validation that taking creative risks could be not only artistically rewarding, but financially lucrative as well. The behind-the-scenes strategies of box office production are fascinating in their own right. Release dates were carefully chosen to maximize visibility while minimizing competition. Marketing campaigns extended beyond theaters into merchandise, digital platforms, and interactive experiences that immersed fans even before they set foot in a cinema. This was not simply a release, it was an orchestration, a carefully choreographed rollout designed to turn the film into an event. Looking back, it's clear that the film's success was not solely the result of its marketing prowess or release strategies. At its heart, it triumphed because the techniques employed in its making created a work of genuine artistry. The camera work, the editing, the sound, the light, these weren't just tools. They were instruments in a symphony, conducted with care and vision. And because the film resonated so deeply on an emotional and intellectual level, audiences embraced it not just as entertainment, but as something worth revisiting, worth discussing, worth treasuring. What strikes me most when thinking about all this is how invisible these techniques often are to the casual eye. Many who left the theater may not have consciously noticed the way the lighting shifted to underscore hope, or the way the pacing of edits mirrored a heartbeat. Yet they felt it. And that is the magic of great filmmaking. It doesn't need to announce itself. It seeps into us quietly, shaping our experience from within, until we are living not outside the story but inside it. And perhaps that is why this film's legacy endures, not just in box office records or marketing triumphs, but in the subtle way it captured the hearts of those who watched it. It taught us that filmmaking at its best is a dance between technique and emotion, a marriage of precision and passion. And in that dance, we find something unforgettable.